Welcome. I'm glad that we have more people interested in learning about the alternative pathway to a high school diploma for students with significant cognitive disabilities. This is some work that I have been doing over the past year as part of, I'm a project lead for a state project out of Sacramento County Office of Education called California Includes. And our role is to provide statewide resources for everybody. So family-centered, also community-centered and educationally centered to help increase inclusivity and belonging for all students. And so as part of that, we look for holes where things aren't clear or where there's confusion in the field, where people are asking for more, and that's where this really came out of. The alt pathway is new-ish, I would say. It's not new, but it's new enough that people were getting very confused. Parents were starting to understand that this was available and asking questions of districts that didn't necessarily know the answers. And so we created some resources around that, and this slide presentation is a portion of those resources. And I say it's a portion because every audience that we have, it can be tailored to that audience. So I have presented for CACs, and it's a very family focus. I use the same slides because the information is important, but I'm not gonna necessarily talk about things that are specific to like how to do it for parents necessarily, or like how do you fix the transcript or how do you do those things. But at the same time, I've also presented to schools. I presented to county offices. Next week, I will be presenting to family empowerment centers. Maybe it's next week. That could be the week after. And we're also presenting to DOR. So lots of presentations, but what I want you to understand is that the slide deck that you have available to you is the same slide deck, there's just hidden slides. And what that means is they're there, but depending on who I'm talking to, I may turn them on or turn them off, but they're available, and they have some like really extensive speaker notes to explain more about the particular slide. So you know who I am. I'm Stephanie Coleman. I am an education specialist, and I supported students with mild to moderate disabilities for 16 years as a case manager and teacher. Primarily in secondary, but I also was a division lead or department chair for a very large comprehensive high school that had 5 programs that supported students with extensive support needs and 17 case managers for students with mild to moderate disabilities. So if you just heard all those people, it's a very large number of students that we served. And throughout the time that I served in that capacity and as a teacher at that site, we did a lot to increase inclusive practices for students. And I, for the longest time, wished that this was a thing. And it was a really beautiful day when I came into this role and was given an opportunity to see the work that had been done leading up to this becoming part of the law, and knowing that I wasn't the only person, because sometimes when we're teaching, we feel a little bit like we're the only one doing, like we're like, does anyone else know what to do? And it was wonderful to be able to see that there are a lot of people doing great work. So this toolkit you have available already, that's that same QR code. Just know that there are a lot of resources in there to help us understand and know what to do depending on your role. I want you to all imagine a world that is representative of the true variability that exists in this world, where everyone is a shared and important valued member of every community, where students all have an opportunity to earn a high school diploma, because we know that a high school diploma is a rite of passage that so many of us have had opportunities to benefit from, and small population, but an important one, has not ever had access to. And when we think about that world, how does that world look different than it does today? And if we actually realize what can happen when all students have an opportunity to earn a high school diploma, we realize it's so much more than a diploma. It's so much more than just a piece of paper, but it's the realization that we as a society value every single member of our society as equal and important members. And that variability is actually something that we want and we honor and we're excited about, rather than something that we create systems that show that that's actually counter to how we feel. So the idea of the ALT pathway really is undergirded in this idea of presumed competence. Have we all heard the words presumed competence before? Okay, I'm going to read this definition, and then we're going to see a video in a minute. But to presume competence is to acknowledge that all individuals have the ability to learn, to communicate, to participate in their own way. It means that we provide opportunities by creating accessible and inclusive spaces. To presume competence is to respect the value of human diversity. Not presuming competence is to actively cause harm. And this definition is from the Autism Women's Network. So that last piece, as an educator, when I have shared this particular definition, it kind of hurts a little bit because we think that last sentence feels really jarring. To not presume competence is to actively cause harm. And that seems like a really bold statement. And it is a bold statement, but it's undergirded with the idea that when we don't give people opportunities, they will never achieve them. Because if you don't ever have the chance, how could you ever yes or not, right? So presuming competence is to believe that everyone can and let people have the supports that they need to be able to achieve that. But no matter what, having the opportunity is going to get us much further than if we didn't have the opportunity in the first place. So I want you to hear from me, not from me. I want you to hear not from me because there are some really amazing people that share about presuming competence. And one of them that I'm not going to show you because this one's especially long, but it is in the slides and I highly recommend you go back and watch it later or YouTube it, is Shelley Moore sharing about her experience with a young man named Daniel. And in her experience, Shelley is one of the premier people that talk about inclusive education. She has a YouTube channel called 5 More Minutes, and they are 5-minute videos that will change your life. I truly say that from the bottom of my heart. She's quite amazing at contextualizing ideas and making them like, oh, well, that's not that complicated. That seems like that should be easy for us to put in place. But what's important is to know where Shelley started. And here she talks about her first teaching experience with a young man named Daniel and the power of not presuming competence on her part and what she learned from him about the power of believing that all of us, every single person, can achieve at high levels when given the opportunity. So please watch that video, and I'm going to click through it, and it's going to try and start, so patience. But then I'm going to let you listen to another young man named Otto. Sorry, there we go. So Otto Lana, did anyone go to the SIP conference this year? Okay, put that on your list for next year because it's free. Supporting Inclusive Practices, also known as SIP. They're out of El Dorado County Office of Education, and they put on a beautiful conference every year. You can actually just write it down because they recorded everything, and it's all online. So you could go watch his keynote. He and a couple of his friends are non-speaking autistic people, and they use a variety of technology to help them with their speech. And Otto, it's important to note, did not have access to meaningful communication until he was well into high school. And he has a few videos, not this particular one. I want you to hear from him about a contest that he won and this beautiful poem that he wrote. But he shares in his story and many of his experiences in his videos about what life was like for him up until the point that he got meaningful communication and could tell people, stop doing that. But he says, we did a lot of glitter and made a lot of pudding. And when I say that, I think all of us in the room understand that that is not presuming competence. And yet that's the experience that a lot of people have that don't have access to meaningful communication, because there's people with kind, wonderful hearts that want your day to be good, but don't believe that there's this higher level of achievement that all of us can have. And so I want you to hear from Otto, who spent a lot of time making pudding and playing with glitter, and hear how absolutely beautiful his mind is. And now that we are blessed to have access to what's inside his mind, the realization that being in a classroom for all those years and how much every time I listen to Otto, I'm like, this kid is brilliant. What if he wasn't sitting and doing pudding and glitter for all that time? Like he's an honor student, graduated just this past year with high honors, incredible young man, took a lot of AP courses, but like how much more? How much more had all those years of instruction been with a presumption of competence? So let's hear from Otto.
Hello viewers, and welcome to Where the Magic Happens. I'm Otto Lana, the winner of the graphic novella category for my acrostic Scrabble poem, Freedom is Not a Game. This is my voiceover actor and brother, Addison. We are decade-delayed twins. Just look at this photo when he was my age. See the resemblance? I communicate in several ways, either through someone reading the words I have written in silence, or listening to Addison read my words to others, like right now, or my iPad and the voice through a computer-generated Australian man. My Australian man voice will read the description of my poem, and Addison will read the actual acrostic poem. Thanks to Jen, Lindsay, and all of the Kids Right judges. It's an honor to be a part of this program.
Freedom is Not a Game by Otto Lana. Freedom. Fragility, responsibility, education, equality, democracy, opportunity, marginalized.
45 years ago, President Gerald Ford signed the law which allows me the freedom to receive an education as a disabled person. The fragility of this freedom is evident in that I have to prove my presence in this classroom is appropriate, year after year. I have to prove my placement and my academically rigorous curriculum is appropriate, year after year. I am threatened with a change in placement despite demonstrating academic success, year after year. With the emotional and financial toll this battle consumes year after year, we can definitely say, freedom isn't free. With freedom comes responsibility. We must make sure that freedom guarantees access to everyone. Democracy allows our freedom to vote and to exercise our opinions which shape our legislature and the laws that govern us. As we discover marginalized populations who are denied equal access and opportunities, we can right these wrongs with our collective voices to our elected officials. This acrostic poem on a Scrabble board is to evoke a sense of irony, because freedom is not a game. It is serious business.
In this video, Otto is using a alphabet board, and he is typing out the letters T-H-A-N-K.
Thank. You. Thank you.
So he explains to us using an acrostic poem on a Scrabble board, because freedom is not a game, right? There's so much depth to Otto's understanding of the realities of our education system, and he is able to communicate that because after many, many years of not having meaningful communication, he now does. And we got to see the challenges that still exist for him. He had that beautiful speech that he wrote that we got to listen to, and as you watched him type thank you and the time that it took for him to do that, it still takes a lot of effort and energy to be able to communicate, and yet it's worth the time. It's absolutely worth the time. And so that leads us into having a quick overview. Just this one's a short one. I'm only pulling 2 case laws on you here about how, where did this come from? Case law. So I took it in college, and then I had an opportunity to teach it at Sac State, and I all of a sudden fell in love with it because I better understood why we learn about it. So we have lots of laws like this one that get put into our legal system, right, into education code, but it's not until oftentimes we have case law or someone that sues that help us really understand what does the law mean. That is how it works in our entire system. And so we have a number of cases over the last few years, some of them in California, many of them in California, that help us to understand what is the least restrictive environment and what is the responsibility that we have to ensure that every student has access to it. So the first case that we look at is the Andrew F. versus Douglas County case. And basically what this court case ends up telling us is that it's really important that education be tailored to student needs. We don't do a plug and play. Okay? You don't have to be a square peg to fit into a square hole. Instead, we're going to design what's going to be there to support you. Okay. In addition to that, it acknowledges that most children, or for most children, inclusive education, so being in the general education setting, is far from hinders their ability to access, but instead increases. And so in this, they reinforce the idea that least restrictive environment should be in the general education setting, that we should do everything in our power to provide the supports and services needed there first, and then only increase when necessary to a more restrictive environment. We also have the DR versus Redondo Beach case. Again, California cases. And this is not a far away case. Look, 2022, this is very recent. And this, again, reinforced the right that all children have a right to and should be able to access the least restrictive environment. And just like Otto said, they shouldn't have to prove that right. They especially shouldn't have to prove that every single year. But by nature of being a student in the state, in this case, in the state of California, they have a right to the least restrictive environment. We need to provide them the supports, and we should only be looking at other settings if those supports do not give all of the things they need in order to be successful. But we shouldn't be just jumping to other places. There's a couple of important questions that really have been surfaced over the years. Some of these have surfaced during work group reports that the state has compiled a bunch of experts and families, and these are the questions that have really risen to the surface. 1, are all students given an opportunity to have access to standards-aligned grade-level curriculum? And the answer to that question for a lot of students has been no. Are there teachers that are adequately trained in the elements of universal design and MTSS? We're working on it. It's a slow, I train on UDL and it's a slow path, but it's important, right? That helps us. Universal design for learning, not everybody's trained on it, is basically a design process where we recognize variability, that every single one of us is different. We all have learning strengths, and they're all in different places. We all have areas that are struggles for us, and they're all in different places. And so knowing that variability, we can write targeted goals that don't include a whole lot of extra. So instead of saying that a student is going to write an essay comparing and contrasting the events of World War II, we recognize that students need to understand the events of World War II, and that's what they need to know. And then we can get really creative in thinking of the ways that we plan to give them multiple opportunities to learn about that, and that there are a lot of ways that you could show that you understand some events from World War II. And so universal design is really that shift in the way we go from a traditional classroom approach to one way to learn it and one way to show it, to opening up to multiple means. Then, right? Hallelujah. Are teachers in multi-grade separate settings set up for success to teach grade level standards if they have multiple grade levels they serve? So this question really asks, if a teacher, sometimes we have heard this as called special day classes, if you are a teacher who is in a separate setting or a special day class, and you have a K3 course or a K2, or you have a 3-5 course, how difficult would it be to actually be able to teach the standards-aligned curriculum for your 3rd graders and your 4th graders and your 5th graders when they're all together? Are we setting people up for success to be able to do that? So it's a question to consider. And then finally, was the most inclusive environment considered? And we've already talked about this. Have we considered it? Have we had those questions? And so I want you to think, as we're thinking through these questions, in your particular role. All of you have different roles. We went through with lots of hands. I mean, you don't all have different roles. There's parents in the room, there's service providers, there's teachers, there's administrators. Each of us have a role in bringing these conversations to the forefront of the conversations you're having when we're talking about serving students. So we have a couple of myths that I just want to bust right off the top, okay? When we talk about all students, including students with extensive support needs, being able to have access to a high school diploma, lots of people are like, what's the point? It doesn't really matter. A certificate of completion is good enough. Well, we know that 90% of employers, when surveyed, prefer to hire someone that has a high school diploma. 66% of the jobs, this was from a job report, 66% of the jobs, a minimum requirement was a high school diploma. There's a box. You have to check it. If you can't check it, then you will just right off the top be screened out. You can't tell me a high school diploma doesn't have weight. We, again, presuming competence, right? Like if you don't even have an opportunity, can you show that you can do it? No, so we need to have opportunity. The next myth is that students with extensive support needs don't need a diploma because they'll be able to find work as volunteers and in supported employment situations that don't require a diploma. While that may be an option, that is one option, everybody has a right to work and a right to employment. And we're not going to say that you're going to need a supported employment environment for the rest of your life because then we're not presuming competence. So we want everybody to have options and not be held to something because we assumed or presumed that they wouldn't need it. So California, kind of a little quick history lesson. California put together a work group to look at the diploma situation because the Every Child Succeeds Act, which came after IDEA, or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, ESSA said, you can have a diploma for students with significant cognitive disabilities. The federal government said, yes, absolutely. And there were a number of states that did. And so California said, we need to look into this because we think that this is a priority. And so they put together a work group of really amazing people. And the things that the Every Child Succeeds Act said that this diploma has to have are 3 components. It has to be standards-based. It has to align with the state requirements for a high school diploma. State requirements, and we're going to get into that in just a minute, what that means. And it has to be obtained within the same period that a student is eligible for free and appropriate education, which we know to be until they're 22. So it needs to be something that can be achieved during that period of time, has to be standards aligned, and it has to, it only has to meet the state, I don't want to say only, the requirement is the state requirement for a diploma, which is different than many district requirements. Okay, so what happened? Well, the work group came together and said, yeah, we need to do this. Of course we need to do this. And they looked at different states that had already had it in place. They looked at what was available. They understood the law. And then they created a report that they sent to the state of California. And from that report, we ended up with Ed Code 51255.31. This requirement now says that students with exceptional needs attending a school district, county office of education, charter school, or state special school can graduate from high school through a newly defined diploma pathway by meeting the following criteria as referenced in the student's individualized education plan. What does that mean? It has to be a conversation in an IEP, okay? What are the requirements? These are the requirements. Are you ready to hear them? The student needs to be in high school. Ta-da! No. And they need to be eligible for the California Alternative Assessment. We also refer to that as the CA. That's the requirement. Okay? They also have to have access to standards-aligned curriculum that meet the state requirements for a diploma. So, does the student have to show high levels of proficiency? They have to have access to standards-aligned curriculum, and they need to have what I like to refer to as meaningful access. So that doesn't mean I'm sitting in a science class in the back of the classroom coloring on a coloring page, but that we are meaningfully planning for actual plan. Like we're making it happen, right? We may not be, and there are further trainings that I'm happy to do to show like what are the ways. This is just an overview today, but there are ways that we can make sure that if we're looking at photosynthesis, is there any reason that all students couldn't learn about photosynthesis? No. Are there meaningful ways that students could show that they, like, through their various communication devices, show the stages and phases of photosynthesis? Absolutely. So there are a lot of things that we start to think, oh, I don't know. But when we actually dive in, we're like, yeah, and it's interesting. Science is fun, right? Or can we understand order of events? Why do we always have to go to the simplest books when, instead of presuming that we can understand high-level content in multiple ways, like maybe it's an audiobook or it's a video or it's a graphic novel, but having access to understanding and then learning like order of events. That's a high-level standard. We can do that using our communication, but we do need meaningful communication. Yes. She asked what the California Alternative Assessment is. So it is the modified assessment. So the eligibility for the CAW is well developed and established in California. You talk about it as part of an IEP process, and it is a well-defined process to meet eligibility for that. The state of California selected that because it was the easiest way to ensure that what this particular diploma is for students that have significant cognitive disabilities, which is part of the eligibility for the CAW. We don't have modified standards in California. There are other states that chose to do modified or standard strands. In order to meet these requirements, we can use the standard strands that other states chose to adopt, but that's a deeper conversation. Yes, it is. It's the standardized assessment. It's the alternative version of the standardized assessment. Okay, so there are some updated FAQs on the state's website. So if you have more questions, they're there. I do have some other reference tools too. Let me give you an overview because I'm not going to assume anybody understands the difference between state requirements. I had a wonderful teacher in my last session that has been teaching for a long time, and she didn't know what state requirements were. So let's have no presumption that any of us understand it, and we're just going to go from the top, all right? So there are different ways that you can earn a high school diploma in the state of California. The first one that we hear a lot is A to G. How many of you have heard A to G? How many of you don't understand what A to G means? Great, okay. A to G are requirements that the California university system requires that students have taken in order to be eligible to go directly to a four-year college. Those requirements are often higher requirements than even some district requirements. So some districts have like, these are our district requirements, and these are A to G. But many districts in the state have actually adopted A to G as their district requirements. And those requirements include 4 years of English. It includes 3 years of mathematics all the way through IM2. And so they're higher requirements. Just understand that they are a higher requirement. Foreign language is often a requirement that creates a big barrier for students, a lot of students with identified disabilities and without, because learning a foreign language is hard, right? And so knowing that those are the state requirements, that's one way. Another way is what are called CTE, or career technical education pathways. And there are some schools that have career technical education courses. Think about things like culinary, business academy. What did I hear? Culinary, yeah. Auto shop. There are different career technical education. So it's things that you, like technical skills. And that's another adopted way that some districts will offer to have, and it's an approved way in the state of California, you can earn a diploma. And then there's what are called the state requirements. And the state of California says, boards, you can do what you want because we're fans of local control here. You can add more, but you have to, at a minimum, have what we call our state requirements. And that is 3 years of English, 2 years of math, including algebra, but we don't have algebra in California anymore, so it's IM1, all the way through IM1. Integrated math, thank you. Integrated math 1. Sorry, I'm going to try not to use acronyms. I know it's bad. You have to take 2 years of science, a physical and a life science. You have to have 3 years of social studies, which include world and U.S. history, and then government and econ. So most of us that may be familiar with what those courses are, many of us may. You also have to take one class that can either be a visual or performing art. So that could be like a drawing and painting class or like a hands-on art class. It could be drama. It could be band or choir. That's a visual or performing art. Or you could take 1 year of a foreign language, or it is absolutely a language. So it really should say world language. It should. Yes, and or it could be a career technical education course. So it could be any of like a year of culinary, a year of floral design, any of those courses. And then 2 years of PE. Those are the state requirements. So if you took all of those classes, it's 130 credits. Most school districts, almost entirely, have a requirement of 220. A to G, in order to get those college requirements, requires 220. It will take that many to be able to earn a high school diploma. So, that being said, there are only a few pathways currently. There were only a few pathways or ways that were designated for students to be, no matter where they were, no matter what district they were in or what board policies were in place, that they could be eligible to have the state requirements be their requirements. And some of those are down here at the bottom. Foster youth, are multilingual learners, members of military families, adjudicated youth, homeless youth, or alternative ed participants. And those all come to be because they have life circumstances that sometimes make it difficult to meet the requirements across a district, or they move a lot. And so I will tell you my experience my senior year. I got married. Ooh, it was juicy. In March. And I moved to a different district to finish up high school. Now, I will tell you, my high school, I was like super ahead on credits. And I moved to San Juan Unified, not too far from here. And they had 2 extra class requirements for their requirements, like 2 semester classes. I graduated at the end of July, my senior year. And that is because when requirements change, it makes it challenging. And so these groups of students are often students that do move a lot, and so those state requirements allow them to have accommodations for that, to still earn their high school diploma in 4 years. So knowing that we already have these types of accommodations in place, our excitement is that now we also are recognizing that we need to have a pathway for students that have significant cognitive disabilities to still have access to all the same things. But this pathway is a little different in that all of these, we're under the same grading rules, we're under the same expectations. The alternative pathway to a high school diploma allows for a pathway for students that are going to need of various means to be able to learn and to show proficiency in standard strands rather than the comprehensive, really bulky, heavy standards, to be able to do that. And so knowing that, we now have this new pathway, and if you look, these requirements are the same as the state requirements. Okay, same classes that we're expected to provide for students. They still need to have access to 3 years of English. They still need to have access through Integrated Math 1. They still need to have access to all of those social studies classes and have life science and physical science. Now, the way and the depth and the means and all of those things should be individualized for each student, but we should have the expectation that everyone is going to have access to that, which means every student should have access to learning about biology. Like, there's lots we can learn about biology. And there's lots that we can learn about, I always say Hamlet, because I taught Hamlet in high school, and it wasn't until I read it in a graphic novel that I was like, oh, that's what they're talking about, right? Like, I needed the visual supports, right? And then but it was all still Shakespeare. He was still talking in all his fancy words, but it was like there was visual supports provided. Sometimes that's all we need to really have deep depth of knowledge. And so we want to make sure that we have that for all students, but all students can learn about Hamlet. It's a very interesting story. Talk about a juicy story. All right, you have access to this. It's even tiny, even when this is a big slide, because it's really just a reminder for me to tell you, that this is a really good document. The questions that many of you are having will be answered. This is like a question and answer. Which type of, which category of diploma, does A to G, who's eligible, a traditional high school diploma, the alternative diploma. This is a good document, and it is in both your home-based document and then also in the slides. So don't try and read it in the slides. Open the document. It's much more user-friendly. Okay. So this is just reminding everybody what this says in the legislation, in the rules now, the official new laws, is that students are no longer being held to the district requirements. If the IEP team deems them eligible for this pathway, that we go to the state requirements. Does that mean we stop giving access to things like a foreign language? No. If we have interests in things, let's make sure students have access. And I'm going to show you what it could look like, because what does it look like? Because we had a good question, like, what about all those transition courses that we know are important? What about life skills classes that we know are important? We are not saying let's not do those. What we're saying is let's make sure we are still having high levels of academic rigor. We're still expecting that we're going to learn about English and science and math, but also there's plenty of room for it, okay? So every counselor in California, I'm pretty sure it's everywhere, but in California, it's supposed to meet annually with every student. Oftentimes, in our cases, it happens during an IEP meeting, if a counselor is present in an IEP meeting, because that's where we talk about what's the plan for next year. Typically, it happens in spring, oftentimes somewhere around February and March, because it's before the master schedule kind of gets going. And at that time, they talk about what have you taken? What's, what are we thinking we want to take for the future? And we make sure that we're meeting the requirements and moving along in the progression we should. And if we need a little summer school, they give us a summer school form during that time too. Okay, so this is kind of what it would look like if I just went right here. This is the type of setup that they would have for the first 4 years. But in our case, we get extra time, which is really great, right? Now, I don't recommend that we plan for an 8-year plan, and here's why. That's what a 4-year plan looks like. All the yellow are all those classes that you were worried we weren't going to get to. Transition support, independent living skills, all of those things we still have time and space. And look, this is 4 years, so guess what? We still have 4 more years that if we needed to spread out, we have plenty of room and then plenty of time. Right? So this is just showing what it could look like. I have 3 versions of this in the slides. This first version is we're talking about some foundations classes, or those are often separate settings for those classes, so taught by an education specialist, but it's the content. You see some co-teaching up here. You also see some modifications up there, so maybe they're in the general education classroom and we're modifying some of the standards to a standard strand rather than the comprehensive standard. And then the yellow, like I said. But if you look at freshman year, let's all just be sad for freshmen for a minute. Can we just all take a moment to be sad for freshmen? It's so hard to be a freshman. They don't get any fun classes. Like, we pretend they do. They get like 1, but really if you take anything, like, you really don't. My kid's taken AVID. Now she has to take summer school for health. Like, AVID, is that really an elective? I mean, she elects to take it, right? So that being said, 9th grade's hard for everybody. So when you look up there and you're like, it's hard for everybody. It's just a hard year. But it doesn't have to be, because again, we still have, all these invisible years. So if we need to make a little bit of tweaks or adjustments, we totally can. My intention was to show you how it could be done in 4 years, following essentially what a 9th grade course of study, a 10th grade course of study, 11th and 12th would look like for students. You get over here to senior year, they have hardly anything to do. That's why a lot of kids graduate early, right? Or get into trouble their senior year. Okay, so there's a sticky note on top of these just to remind you what this one could be an example of, so just know that. This one is just a different type of courses. So you see some fundamentals. Those would probably be with your case manager in a class supporting students with more extensive support needs. We have some fundamental Englishes. So when we have settings where primarily our school sites are deciding, okay, Our teachers aren't quite knowing what UDL is. They don't know what universal design is, and they don't currently have a plan for serving students with more extensive support needs in general education. So we're going to take some baby steps into this process. We're going to start with where we're at, and we're going to make some moves. This is what this one might look like. This is where we say, oh, we're not doing pudding and glitter anymore. We're going to make sure that we actually have English happening during English time. And we're going to work on getting some support for those teachers so they know what to teach during English. And I don't say that flippantly because I'm trying to be rude. I'm just trying to help us move in the right direction, right? Knowing that there are a lot of really incredible, there are incredible educators. They are my friends, and I love them, that are teaching and doing the best they can, but we also need to support them. Again, teaching students from 9th grade through 12th grade or 9th grade through 22 in the same setting, it would be really hard to expect them to be able to do all of this during one period. So extending grace, I say it kind of jokingly, knowing that we just have room to go. We have places to go, but everybody is doing great work. We just need to see where we're at and see where we can make those steps. So this one might look like making sure that students have access to actual curriculum and that it's standards aligned, which means I'm not submitting books to them to teach 2nd grade material to a 9th grader. We're making sure that it is grade level and that these teachers also have access to their peers that teach that content, because it's really helpful to learn from somebody who knows, right? I've taught a lot of things in my time. I really have. I've taught almost every subject area, and I heavily relied on my content expert friends to help me understand what it was that we were supposed to be teaching. So we have to provide some opportunities for that to happen. Otherwise, it becomes a really heavy burden to carry that you want to do because everybody has a heart for it, but it's hard to do without support. So if you're an administrator and you're hearing me say this, we have some systems that we need to help build into support. This last example is a combination, is a combination of what you saw that's more of the inclusive was more of the first one. The second one was more of moving from where we are to making sure we have curriculum. This is a good combination of the two, okay? So some co-teaching, some fundamentals, kind of a combination of things. What I do want to share is some next steps. Some of you might be wondering, okay, what do I do? How do I have these conversations? How many of you are wondering that right now? There are lots of moves that we have to make. And depending on your role, whether you're a parent or a teacher or an administrator or a service provider, there are moves that we can all make. The first one is any conversation we're having about a student, we should make sure that we're having the conversation about least restrictive environment. What is the least restrictive environment, and what services and supports can we put into place to ensure that that student has access and success, building on their strengths. That's the first thing. All of us can have that conversation in meetings. The second thing is if you're an administrator, maybe you're looking like a district level administrator, we're gonna have to start having conversations about about board policy, because this is the board policy shift. It is a state law, but it doesn't mean that it's been adopted necessarily by districts and school boards and county offices, and so that is a big shift. And you might ask if that's happening. It is starting to happen. I will tell you, more and more places are starting to have these. And then I yesterday had somebody be like, "So now we need to update our board policy because now there's not dates." And I was like, "Yeah." Sorry, but it's true, and so there, but that's a little tweak. That's like an amendment, right? The other thing we can start to do is talk about expectations. Have the conversations around, right now my IEP says it's a certificate of completion, but I want my student on a diploma track. So at our next meeting, we're going to have a conversation about that, and we're going to start working on what is it going to look like, and acknowledge that it's probably going to take a little bit more than 4 years. I just showed you what maybe 5 years from now could look like for students right away. Because we have lots of places that are in the moves, lots of wonderful districts, and if this is all the moves that we need to make, it's not even all of them, but if this is the moves we need to make, it's gonna take a little bit of time. But thankfully, we have some time to make those things happen. We have time to start looking and saying, okay, we don't know yet how we could have access to all of these courses for a student in 9th grade and have support, because right now our system is set up that we don't have enough service providers to make that happen. That's okay, but can we at least make 2 of them happen? And then next year, we start to talk about how we make 3 or 4 of them happen. And we strategically start having the conversations that we can move closer and closer to this, because there are things that we can be doing. Each of us have a responsibility to be having these conversations, and not in a way that, like, I think it's hard. I've been in lots of litigious conversations and meetings, but we're a team and we're working together on this. And so no matter what your role is, bringing it forward as this is what's it, it's a law, we have to do it, like there's the have to, but it's the greatest thing to happen for students in a long time. And so we want to do it. We don't just have to do it, we want to do it. And we know it's going to take time, but what's our game plan, and how are we going to make those shifts a little bit at a time every year, so we're getting closer and closer to it? Not even being a conversation anymore. I mean, it is. It always should be a conversation, but you know what I mean? Like, it should be everybody's on a diploma track. Period. End of that sentence. So one last thing, if you're interested in learning more about universal design for learning, depending on what your role is, or you're just interested in it. Remember when I told you at the very beginning about supporting inclusive practices? Their website's not the most accessible, but they got good stuff on it, really great stuff, including access to a whole slew of trainings provided by Novak Education, and they're free and they're online. And Katie Novak is an amazing teacher, and she teaches all things UDL. So go to their website, check it out. This is actually linked in the slides, so it'll take you right there, which might be the easiest way to find it. To wrap up, please feel free to email me. If I don't have the answer to questions, I will try and figure out who I can answer those questions to. I like it better when you nicely send me people. So if you're going to send me people to talk to, let's work together for that to be a positive partnership. But I am happy to have discussions, and I have in the past had discussions with different districts that are in the learning journey too. We're all in a learning journey on this. And so if you would like to pass my information along, please just don't make it something that I'm going to be in the middle of something. I don't want any of that. But I would be happy to help. And then it would be helpful if you're willing to complete the survey. It's also in the home-based document if it's easier, however is easiest to get to it. But to give me any feedback that might be helpful for the future. And there is an option on there that if you would like to ask a question, or you want me to connect back with you, the last question just says, do you want me to connect with you? You can put your email in there. Or it would actually be easier if you just emailed me. Just connect with me via email. But I would love any feedback that could be helpful, because like I said, I do present this a lot, and I want it to be really clear as it can be. It's law, y'all. It's not clear. It's clear as mud. Remember that case law? That's what helps us understand things, unfortunately. So anyway, thank you so much for being here and being such a great audience.
The UC Davis Mind Institute was founded in 1998 with the promise to reduce and prevent the disabilities that can be associated with autism and other neurodevelopmental conditions. Every day, our clinicians and researchers make progress on that promise. Our groundbreaking research on autism, Fragile X syndrome, chromosome 22q11.2 deletion syndrome, ADHD, and other conditions associated with disability are helping affected individuals achieve their fullest potential. Please visit our website or our social media platforms to find out more about current studies, upcoming events, and how you can help make a difference.